see you all there. Welcome to the Republic of Work Lunch and Learn series. They're held every Tuesday at 1 p.m. in webinar format. There are a variety of topics all businesses can learn from, and you can find details on the upcoming events on the What's On section of the Republic of Work website, republicofwork.com. My name is, of course, Laurence Knell, or Laurie, and I'm with a company called Strategic Innovation Partners. And we look quite specifically, as the name suggests, at strategy and innovation. So the sort of thing we're going to be talking about today, which is innovation in crisis, fits very much with the sorts of things that we look at. You can see my two Twitter handles there, at Laurence Knell and at Brain4Biz, and I'll explain what those are in just a moment. Because before we get too far into things, just to give you a little bit of background on myself, as I mentioned, I'm with a company called Strategic Innovation Partners. We set up in 2017. The focus is strategy and innovation, strategy in the sense of where you want to go to, and innovation in terms of how you're going to get there, steps along the way that you can take. I'm also the co-founder of Brain4Business. And Brain4Business is a collaboration with an academic neuroscientist, and it's really about bridging the gap between some of the really fascinating research which is happening in the world of the brain and behavioral sciences, so things like neuroscience, psychology, behavioral economics, and so on, and bridging the gap across to the world that people like you and me live in, and then the work that we do, and trying to dig out some of those insights. And so we've recently kicked off a podcast, which is called Brain4Business, Brain4Life. If you're interested, you can check that out. It's on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict. Just search for Brain4Business. I'm also affiliated with the Open University, with Trinity College Dublin, and with the Irish Management Institute. I do some lecturing and so on a number of those programs. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there, give you a sense of who I am, but it's not really about me, it's more about the topic. And the key themes that we'll be talking about today are as follows. And they are very much themes. We're going to be sort of walking through them in different ways and coming back to them and integrating them. So I think all of these things exist in different ways and different times. They're all tightly linked together. So first of all, think about different forms of innovation, how they can be leveraged in a time of crisis. We're going to consider the role of a leader in creating the context for innovation. Think about the challenge of risk, failure, and constraints in innovation. Think about how leaders, people such as yourselves, can become more innovation resilient. And then finally, think a little bit about the key elements of an innovation strategy. It's not just about saying, we're going to innovate. It's about actually having a conscious process that you can work towards. Needless to say, any questions, please do put them out there. I will be keeping an eye on the chat box. But also, if you have any thoughts or want to grab the microphone, do let me know. And I will be putting questions to you as we're going along. I've been strictly instructed to finish at 2 o'clock, so we shall do that, if not perhaps slightly earlier, but that will depend. I'm open to all your questions and comments. And you may, of course, feel free to contact me afterwards by email, Twitter, whatever else. So to start with, I want to ask you a question. Are you innovative? Anyone want to grab that? Anyone sort of say immediately, yes, I am innovative? And I know some of you work in that space. Potty and I are in touch on LinkedIn. But would any of you consider yourselves to be innovative? Any thoughts? Any takers on that? No, well, it's an interesting question on a certain level, because we kind of all know we all think we know what innovation is on a certain level, and we all like to think that we're smart and we're good at doing certain things. But at times, actually, that pressure to come up with really, really new ideas can actually be really hard. It can be a very difficult thing to do. And it's very easy to come up with ideas that we've seen done elsewhere, derivative ideas, if you like. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that. Taking ideas that have been developed elsewhere and bringing them into a new market, a new space, can be really interesting and can be quite profitable. In fact, there's some brothers in Germany, the Sunwehr brothers, who've turned themselves into multi-billionaires by doing exactly that, copying what other people have done. I'm going to take that point a little bit further in a few minutes. But perhaps to answer that question about are you innovative, it can be worth thinking about, well, what is innovation? And the simplest and I think most powerful definition of what innovation is comes from this fellow, Göran Ekvall. And Ekvall argues that innovation is really just a creative idea that has been brought to application. Now, you may feel that's perhaps simplistic, but what the beauty of it is it's realizing that and recognizing that a creative idea doesn't necessarily have to be scientific. It doesn't necessarily have to do with computers. It doesn't necessarily have to do with any particular product, but actually it can come from anywhere. It just has to be a creative idea. And vitally, you have to do something with it. It has to be brought to application. And that is really important. So on the one hand, the creative idea, so something which is novel and useful in a particular domain, which is a fairly standard definition of creativity these days, and then the application of it. It can come from any field, it can come from anywhere, it can apply in any particular domain. But we can also look at it slightly differently and say that, innovation can be defined broadly, encompassing not just brilliant new products, but also distinctive operating practices, managerial tactics, and even business strategies. It's so often seen in terms of, say, new product development, particularly in larger organizations, multinationals and so on. I know I'm conscious that's not the audience I'm talking to today, but it's often defined in a very narrow way. And so when you link these two definitions, the one from Harvard Business Review with that from Laurence Knell L&L, you can see that actually innovation is a really broad concept, and it should be seen, it should be respected in that way. The problem is, though, that, as I've already mentioned, a creative idea brought to application, just to take Eckfeld's definition, can mean lots of different things in lots of different contexts. So if we look at this, for example, this is a creative idea. It's a great way of keeping yourself refreshed while you're watching a sporting match, regardless of whether you have beer in the holders, or you have water, or you have 7-Up or Coke, or whatever you want to have in there. It doesn't matter. But it serves a particular purpose, and it's being brought to application. It's a creative idea brought to application, but you have to wonder, what's the ultimate use in that? Sure, they might sell a couple of thousand units a year as novelty items, but really there's only so much value you're going to get out of it. You're not going to build a particular business. Equally is another item, another creative idea which is being brought to application. The problem here is actually, I would argue, not that I tend to wear high heels particularly often, I would argue, though, that it only serves a fairly limited purpose. There's a whole stack of the foot and the ankle, which is not going to be kept dry by these beautiful little umbrellas. So there's only so much which can of use which can be put to it. Now, so the challenge there is then how to make it real. And you'll remember, of course, that the topic was innovation in time of crisis. And I've jumped straight into innovation, and there's a really simple reason for that. Because let's face it, we all know what is going on out there at the moment. You don't need me to tell you all about COVID-19 and before that Brexit and whatever else is going on. And that's not to mention the whole conflagration in the US at the moment. But there's so much going on. We don't even need to talk about that crisis. And that's before we even get to, say, crisis on a micro level, which might be your cash flow, your investors, your hopes and aspirations for the future for your business. So there's all these different elements going on. But we can still innovate. And I would argue that a time of crisis, rather than being an opportunity to batten down the hatches and to stop all that silliness that might entail coming up with new ideas, it's actually a time when you should start to innovate, and you should start to think about new opportunities that are coming up and what the future is going to look like. Of course, when it comes to your financial management, absolutely be sensible. Don't waste money. Not that you should do that anyway, but start to think a bit more narrowly about that. And when it comes to new ideas and thinking about what's next, now is exactly the time to do it. So if we think then about how do you innovate, you have to recognize, as I'm sure you do, that there are different approaches to innovation. On a certain level, we have what could be called the technology push, and these are all fairly textbook approaches. You start off with a bit of research. Maybe you're intrigued by any idea. You do some research, you come up with something, which you then push out to the market. So it's technology push. You come up with a brilliant idea, well, at least one that you think is brilliant, and you throw it out there. You put it out to the market and pray and plead with people to like your idea, to buy it, to take it on, to integrate it into their current business or processes or whatever. It's very much about you. It's about what you've come up with. Nothing wrong with that, but that's only one way of doing it. It's where a lot of inventors go. They might tinker with things and come up with something, and then they put it out there. The other approach, though, is what's been called market pull. And this has perhaps become a little bit more relevant in recent years with things like design thinking, and perhaps also to an extent lean innovation, where you say, you know what do people actually want? What problems do people have? And there have, of course, been steps to, people who've developed little apps that can go on and scrape through Twitter and LinkedIn to find what problems do people call out the most often, so they can work to resolve them. Or equally, and again, linking back to the design thinking piece I mentioned, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but we just develop that further later on. It can be about going out and seeing where people are and understanding their particular problems and their particular challenges, and then saying, now that's really interesting. How can I come up with a solution to that? How can I solve that particular problem based on what I know or what I'm good at? Or how can I collaborate with other people? The third area, incremental innovation, and that's that bit of fine tuning. And the sad thing is that it's not always that sexy, because we get into this whole world of radical innovation, which is that sort of disruptive innovation. It's about coming up with that big breakthrough idea, the one that's going to transform the world. It's going to be a unicorn. You are going to be a billionaire in 6 months if you come up with that idea. The problem is, disruptive innovation, radical innovation are incredibly rare. They don't happen that often. Much more common is incremental innovation. It might also be known as continuous improvement or fine tuning. It's taking the small little tiny steps and incrementally improving. And the examples I have here, some of you might recognize as the Boeing 737. Now, the one on the left is one of the first 737s from about 1968. What's really interesting is Boeing 737s are still flying today, as the picture on the right demonstrates. Ryanair, they only fly 737s. The problem is, though, and it's not so much a problem, but the important point to recognize is that the 737 on the left, because there have been so many incremental changes along the way, so many fine tunes, the one on the right is a completely radically different plane, a different aircraft. Yet there's still the 737, but it's been improved so many times and incrementally and steadily. But as I said, it's not sexy, that incremental improvement. A few years ago, I was doing some work with the leadership team of a pharmaceutical company, and they'd had this person come in from McKinsey, quite literally the week before I was there. And I wasn't there to talk about innovation. I was actually there to talk about strategy, so the other side of the business. And it just emerged through the conversation. And they were visibly and tangibly angry at this fellow from McKinsey who'd come in, because he was seen as the worldwide guru of innovation for McKinsey. And the reason they were angry was because it's a pharmaceutical company, and any of you who know anything about pharmaceutical companies will know that it's highly regulated. You can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and start all over again. You have to take these very careful, measured steps, because let's face it, if something goes wrong, you can poison the whole stack of people. And this guru simply didn't understand that you couldn't just do radical innovation. He said, if you're not doing radical innovation, don't bother, go home, shut up shop. And they said, we can't. We have to do incremental. And there's nothing wrong, because they're a multi-billion euro, I should say, company. But for them, the most appropriate was that incremental. Yet people can sometimes get very caught up in just trying to have that big breakthrough idea. You might have one. Chances are, sadly, that none of us will. But if you do, fantastic, take it. But just beware, you can also do those very small incremental steps along the way. Partly, though, and this links and perhaps ties together all of these different approaches to innovation here, is that split between, say, the closed innovation model and the open innovation model. And I would argue that for SMEs, and I am an SME, I run an SME, there's a number of us in the business, but still it's an SME. Focusing on very much on that closed innovation model is only of limited value. it essentially assumes that all the good ideas come from here. They come from the boss. They come from the whatever, the smart guy in the corner or girl. Whereas the open innovation model is about looking outwards. It's about understanding, well, what are we good at? What are our core capabilities and our core skills in all of this? And how can we, as a consequence, take that further? So it's recognizing that not all the good ideas come from here, and that actually good ideas that come from elsewhere can be usefully taken and adapted and worked with. And to me, intuitively, that makes sense. Yet it's actually psychologically a really hard barrier to overcome. And you see it in all sorts of organizations. It's very easy to imagine that in a very big organization which has a track record of innovation. But I've also seen it in small organizations of, say, 10, 15 people, where maybe at a certain point, 20, 30, 10, whatever years ago, the organization was set up by someone who was the entrepreneur, who had a really good idea, and it captured a particular space in the market. And now things have kind of solidified. They've gone from that initial dynamism of reacting to the atmosphere around them, the crisis, for example, we're in now. And, well, we're not allowed to have ideas because that's the boss's job. He set us up. She set us up. She was the founder. She has the ideas. We just have to support. And that happens, as I said, in those organizations all the way through to much bigger. Last year, I was doing some work with SkillNet. You may be familiar with SkillNet. There are different SkillNets around the country. I'm doing a piece of research into innovation capability practices. So basically, how do organizations and how do people develop the skills internally for innovation within their people? So essentially, it's kind of linked to learning and development, but also policy and innovation. And I remember talking to one person, and she consciously would not identify where she worked. That's fine. It was a confidential survey, but she wanted to talk to me. People did a survey. They had the opportunity to respond and have a conversation subsequently. And she said, you know what? I don't want to tell you where I work. I could work it out, but that doesn't matter. But in my organization, we're not allowed to have ideas. Because if I have an idea, if I have a new idea, or if I think that a process or a system or something can change, it means that the old idea was bad or wrong. And guess who came up with that old idea? Well, it's the people on the management team. And so if you follow that logic through, for me to say, I have a new idea which is better than the old idea, and the old idea is from the management team, then the management team must be wrong. And you're not allowed to say that. So what was happening was it was stultifying and impeding growth and development and innovation in the organization. So it's really crucial that you start to think about that as you grow and develop your business beyond where it is now, wherever that may be. So it's recognizing that not all the good ideas come from here. And that's where we need to start thinking about leadership and the role that leaders should play. And as a very first important point, I would say that looking outwards is key. So I've already mentioned that market pull approach to innovation. That's absolutely crucial. But so too is having a clear picture of what's happening in the world. Now, it sounds obvious, but actually it's so easy just to get zeroed in. So thinking about things like clusters and outsourcing and network organizations, and again, open innovation, but also crowdsourcing, going out to the market, all these things that you're probably familiar with, but it's worth just reminding ourselves of the power of the crowd and the power of collaboration. So looking around the other businesses that are at Republic of Work, looking around your network of suppliers, looking around your partners, looking at your customers, for example, and saying, you know what, how can we improve this product for you? Simple questions, just taking the time. And of course, right now, while people might be struggling to stay afloat, you might say, well, it's not the right time. But actually, by just saying, look, how can we help you? Is there anything that we're doing or perhaps not doing that we could be doing to make things better for you, to improve the way that our product or service delivers value for you. And that might just be an incremental innovation, or you might stumble across ideas that you hadn't necessarily thought of before, and people didn't necessarily even realize that you were interested in. But there's also a really interesting technique, and that was a term coined by Tom Peters, which was creative swiping. And it's about taking ideas devised by other people in other contexts and adapting them to your circumstance. Now, I mentioned already the Sumver brothers in Germany. What they essentially did, and this is, I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but whatever. As I said, they made themselves multi-billionaires, whatever measure of value or importance that is. But what they did is they looked at what, for example, Airbnb were doing in particular markets, or eBay, or Amazon, and then they created a particular German version of that in order to occupy that space. And this is where it gets a bit cynical and a bit dodgy. They would use similar colors, slightly similar branding, but different enough that they didn't get in trouble. And then they would grow a business. And if the business was successful, as they often were, fantastic. But then they would also hope that the people whose idea they copied would perhaps come and buy them out. And look, we can put aside the sorts of issues that Airbnb is facing right now, but at the same time, recognizing that business model has been very successful for a long time and probably will be again in the future at some point, even if it's not Airbnb. So that was one particular approach of creative swiping. Perhaps a slightly more useful, a more relevant approach, one that's not going to get you into the risk of legal trouble, is captured by these two companies, Southwest Airlines and Ryanair. And I apologize for having pictures of 737s on the screen for the second time. I'm not obsessed with 737s or even with aircraft. But many of you will know that Southwest Airlines, a very successful airline based in Austin, Texas, was the inspiration in many ways for what Ryanair has become. Michael O'Leary went to Texas and looked at the Southwest Airlines model, and he took the key elements that he felt were going to be most relevant for the business in Europe of Ryanair and adapted them. So, for example, using only one type of aircraft, because it means that you only need to train the pilots on one type of aircraft. It means that you only need to have one set of spare parts in every base. You don't need to have multiple sets of spare parts for multiple aircraft. But then he also took things in a slightly different way. So Southwest Airlines, any of you who are familiar with it will know, are renowned for their fantastic customer service. It's a kind of airline where you go on and the staff might be wearing Hawaiian shirts, and the security and safety announcements you get at the beginning of a flight, with buckle your seatbelts, where to find life jacket, they might sing them to you, or they might do them in poetry or rhyme or whatever. Ryanair, I don't quite think you're going to get that, at least not on any of the Ryanair flights I've ever been on. So you see, they went away, they saw a really interesting model, and they brought it back here and they adapted it. Now, these two airlines are not in competition. They never will be. US versus Europe, they're separate. And that's fine. But they were able to creatively swipe those ideas from one and adapt them for another context. So looking outwards is absolutely crucial. But then so too, and this is again where leaders come into it, is looking inwards. So you need to think about teams. You need to think about diversity. You also need to think about failure constraints and empowerment. I'm going to sort of tease out some of these over the next few minutes. But let's take teams and diversity. Linking back to some of the comments I've already made, the day of thinking the best ideas were created here and the best ideas were created by me is well and truly over. The world's too complex now. So teams are better. They come up with better ideas. They're able to work with better ideas. They're able to view them from different perspectives. They're able to bring in different insights, and people within teams are able to challenge each other, hopefully productively and positively. But that's particularly so when you get diversity. Now, there's only so much diversity we can consciously engineer into a team. So this is where having that network of external collaborators or a mentor or coach or just friends and family can be really useful. But what the research has found is the more diverse a team is, the more diverse an organization is, the better quality ideas come out of it. Now that diversity can exist on a number of different levels and in a number of different ways. So of course we have let's say the standard social elements, if you like, of diversity, things like gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, all those sorts of things, which are absolutely important. But you can also think about things which are perhaps a little less visible, a little less obvious, like personality type and different forms of cognitive functioning, as well as some things like different backgrounds, different family backgrounds, different ages, different professional backgrounds. So if you're developing a product, for example, to serve a particular market, say you want to develop a product for 18-year-olds, 18-year-old females, just throw that out there, okay? Don't go and talk to a 65-year-old male, because that's not your target market. He may know, he may have some brilliant insights, but equally, chances are he's not going to be so in tune with the 18-year-old female market as an 18-year-old female is. So go and talk to them, or bring those different voices into your teams. I was doing some work with an insurance company a few years ago, and their head of human resources said to me straight out, Laurie, we have a problem. Our people are pale, they're stale, and they're male. There's a real lack of diversity, and it means that we're just not able to adapt and understand the market as we need to. And obviously a key element of that was a lack of innovation. But I want to step on then to the other points there about looking inwards. And one of my favorite topics is failure. Now, on a certain level, no one likes to fail, right? We don't want our fantastic dreams to go up in smoke. Yet, as an entrepreneur, and as someone working in business, and in fact, in any organization, you have to get to a point where failure and uncertainty are accepted. And that is particularly true when it comes to innovation. Now, James Dyson, as you would know from the cyclonic vacuum cleaner, which bears his name, he has this fantastic line: I built 5,127 prototypes before I got it right. It then goes on that he failed basically 5,126 times, in his own words. The point is, not only did he need to be resilient, not only did he really need to stick with it and have incredible faith and belief in himself, but he also needed to be able to deal with failure. And that's where this really interesting idea of intelligent failure comes into play. And intelligent failure comes about when you're able to learn from your mistakes. You take measured mistakes, a measured risk, I should say, and so that if failure happens, it's okay. So if you can't afford to risk 100,000 euro or 1 million or 10,000 or 100, whatever the number is, don't risk that amount of money, or don't risk those resources. But if you can afford to risk 1,000 euro, but not 100,000, then risk 1,000. That's okay. Take a really simplistic example. If you are involved, or imagine someone involved in selling jam, making jam, selling it at a country market, a farmer's market. For them to make 100 jars and go to the country market, the farmer's market on a Sunday and try and sell them, you know what? If they don't sell the 100, no great loss. They take it home, they eat it themselves, give it to their neighbors, they wash the jars, they make more jam. But if they were to invest their life savings in making 100,000 jars of jam, that's not a particularly intelligent approach. That's pretty dumb, to be honest with you. But people do that kind of thing. Maybe not with jam, but with other things. So intelligent failure is about taking those measured approaches, failing intelligently. And then it goes further. So as a leader, it's about publicly supporting people who fail. So if you have a small team of people saying, you know what, I understand you failed, but we've put in place a framework to support that. So you're not allowed to make a ridiculous failure, which is going to kill the business. And I'm going to publicly support you and acknowledge you. I'm not going to castigate you or punish you. You need to ensure, consequently, that failure is not career limiting, but also that that intelligent approach is managed carefully. Now, there's a lot more we could say about this, but I'm conscious that we're tight for time. But as I said, intelligent failure at its core is about recognizing the value of failure for innovation and the importance of it, but then also taking measured approach to risk and return, so that one silly step doesn't destroy your business. okay? The other point you need to think of is constraints. If you're running a business of any size, and particularly a small business where maybe it's your money and your friend's money, or you've got some investors, maybe their family, it can be very easy to try and control things and to over control things. And there's a certain point where constraints can be useful because they can guide and support folks and activities. So if you start off with a blank page and say to people, just go off and look around and see what you can find, do whatever you want. Well, you know what? It can be really hard. If any of you have ever sat down to write an article or a book or paint a picture with just literally a blank canvas, it can be really, really hard. So having constraints can guide and support and focus activities. They can, in that sense, limit the available choices to manageable level. So on the one hand, if you're trying to think creatively, it can be really valuable to say, you know, in an ideal world, what would we do? Okay. But the reality is it's never an ideal world. There are always limits and constraints. And those limits might be, look, we don't have €1 million to throw at something. So, you know, we have 10,000. Or I want you, it would be great if we could reinvent this business's business model. But actually, that's not where we're at today. We need to think about our financial management processes. So please focus on that. Or I want you to focus on our brand. You forget about, you know, our sourcing of product from wherever. Focus on the brand. Just keep a clear eye on that. So it can pull it all together. There's a concept called the paradox of choice that some of you may have heard of. We're actually having too much choice and too many options can make it harder to choose. And ultimately, when people do choose, they can be less satisfied with the choices that they have available to you. Okay. And in that sense, it's worth remembering that constraints aren't the boundaries of creativity. They help it. They are the foundation of it, and they help guide it. But then, as a leader, you need to recognize that you're also responsible for creating culture within an organization. And I'm really conscious that while this may sound like I'm talking about, you know, mega corporations, I'm not. I'm talking about very small organizations as much as those large organizations. And there has been research to show that there are certain barriers and drivers of innovation that you need to be aware of. So in terms of barriers, things like having a negative attitude, that will never work, that's a stupid idea, etc., is not a good idea. Having a rigid structure, no, we must follow this process. If you have an idea, please send it to me in writing and I will review it. You know, fine, but actually it can start to stifle thinking and innovation. Individualistic goals, so basically incentivizing people based on their own individual achievement rather than the team. On the other hand, the drivers, and we'll get to the middle section, the either or factors in a moment, the drivers of innovation can be very much about having a shared vision, supporting people, giving people a sense of belonging so that they feel they belong. But then that either or, and this is where you need to be particularly careful because the either or factors can go either way, as the name suggests. So having some time pressure can help focus people's minds. Having too much time pressure can stifle thinking. Having some resources but not excessive resources can be good. The same for autonomy, diversity, etc. So finding that balance, these factors can either help or hinder innovation depending on how they are managed, how they are played out. Now, some of the things here, for example, the legal environment or the national culture, you can't do much about that, but it's having that awareness. So if you find, for example, that, you know, considering that, you know, you're all presumably in Ireland at the moment, that the culture in Ireland is not supportive of certain things, then just have that awareness and work with it. Can be absolutely crucial. So your role as a leader in order to support innovation is critical, and no more so than now when we're talking about difficult situation, crisis. And that time pressure, those resources, the autonomy and conflict and so on are particularly important if people are at home and they're struggling. Maybe they've got kids running around, maybe they've got a partner also working at home, whatever it might be. Maybe they're caring for an elderly family member, and you need to kind of give a bit of space, because if you try and narrow that in too hard, narrow in that control, it's actually going to have a negative consequence. Stating the obvious, I know, but sometimes these things, you know, need to be put out there. Part of it then can also come to enhancing your innovation resilience, because it's not enough just to come up with one good idea and then shutting up shop. There are companies that have been very successful doing that. That one idea 20 years ago and they're still reaping the benefits of it. But ultimately, that business model is self-defeating, because you can only sell so many of the same widgets to the same people. And so you have a challenge. You have to expand beyond that. So you need to be more resilient. And how we approach things, how we develop our resilience often comes down to our mindset. Now, you could take the Homer Simpson approach, which is, basically never try, but that's not, I guess, and I'm assuming, who and how you are. You need to have that breadth of engagement. And Carol Dweck, American psychologist, looked at it in terms of mindsets. And while there's been a lot of talk about mindsets in terms of motivation and growth, mindsets are also absolutely critical for innovation, because innovation requires learning and development and finding something better, that improvement, whether radical or incremental, that we talked about earlier on. So on the one hand, you have that growth mindset, that belief that intelligence, abilities, talents, they can be developed. We can get better. Practice makes improvement. No matter how good I am now, I can be better tomorrow if I try, if I give it a go. I can make this product, this invention, my service that I'm offering to my customers better by just working with it constantly, as opposed to, say, the fixed mindset, which is basically, you are how you are, it is how it is, it can't get better. And to me, that is really, really kind of depressing, to have that fixed mindset of saying, you know what, I'm as good as I'm going to get. This is me. And that's it. I'm never going to be a professional golfer. But if I go off and start practicing golf every day, I will hopefully get better. And if I don't, then there's something else going on. It's not because of lack of practice, but I will get better with the right kind of practice. And there's a whole field of expertise called deliberate practice, which plays a really crucial role in the world of innovation. Think about the James Dyson quote about the 5,127 prototypes. That takes not just constant iteration, but also constant deliberate practice. So thinking each time about what I did and linking here to the growth mindset, knowing that I can do it better next time. I just have to try. I can improve. I can make it better. Now, this is all well and good on an individual level, but it also applies, these mindsets also apply on an organizational level. And organizations have mindsets which are very much the beliefs that they have about their workforce, about the nature of talent and ability. So on the one hand, you've got that culture of genius, and this is that sort of organization where talent is worshipped. The godly founder, the saintly coder, the brilliant innovator in the corner that nobody dares talk to because they're so brilliant. And people either have it or they don't. People are either brilliant or they're not. And if you're not, then what sort of future do you really have around here? On the other hand, which links more to the growth mindset, we have this culture of development, the belief that people can grow and improve with effort. So it's about fostering that growth mindset within people and recognizing that your people, however big your team is now, or maybe in the future, or indeed how small it is now or will be in the future, it's about recognizing we can all get better. We all have something to contribute. And the benefits of this culture of development versus the genius mindset have been found and quite stark. So those who have organizations where you find a culture of development, you typically find that there is greater levels of trust, ownership, commitment, loyalty, and lower levels of unethical behavior. In a culture of development where you have that growth mindset, employees believe that companies foster more innovation, collaboration, and also risk-taking. And importantly, supervisors and managers view their people as more innovative, collaborative, and commit to learning and growth and have more potential. So you see this line, hopefully, that I'm sort of drawing through between those different forms of innovation, recognizing how innovation can be developed, some of those organizational approaches, and that mindset that can be really powerfully developed within the organization. There is a line of thinking coming through there, thinking about how you can innovate, and particularly in a time of crisis. So the question then is, how do you make innovation work for you? Well, first and foremost, it's recognizing that time can be seen as a series of horizons. Where we are now, horizon 1, 3 to 5 years, horizon 2, and horizon 3, 5+ years. It's not just about the here or the now. Yes, when things are particularly volatile, that VUCA world, if you like, the term that you may have come across, so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the world as we know it now, yeah, it can be really tough trying to think about, what do I do? But it's nonetheless recognizing that there is a horizon 2. 3 to 5 years time will happen, and 5 years time will happen. So on one hand, dealing with the challenges now, but also making yourself ready for the future by innovating for the future. Find the solutions that your customers need now and think about how you and they can apply them in the future in order to grow the business profitably. But then it's also about taking a strategic approach to innovation. So thinking about how you can redefine a business. What is your business about? Sometimes you need to take that step back. Redefine who the customers are. If you're not getting the traction with your current set of customers, or actually you're finding that your products and services are no longer suitable, try and see where they might be. Really try and understand who your customers might be. That might also involve thinking about what products and services you're offering. So going back to basics, are you actually offering the right products and services? How can you innovate around those? And then thinking about how you get it to market and start the thinking process at different points. So it's recognizing that there's not just one single way to do things. So you can think about how you define the business and the business model, think about who your customer is, think about your products or services, what you're offering, think about how you deliver it to the market, and approach this from different perspectives. Okay, just because you've typically approached it from one perspective and it's been successful up until now doesn't mean it's going to be successful in the future. As the saying goes, what got you here won't get you there. I don't want to speak ill of those who are in trouble, but look at organizations like Airbnb and TripAdvisor. 6 months ago, they were fantastic success stories. Right now, both organizations are in trouble. They need to radically rethink and innovate on the basis of all of these questions. Think about how they can take it further. And of course, something like this, I'm sure you're all familiar with, the business model canvas, using this as a way of analyzing your business, but then also rethinking each of those key areas in a methodical way can be really useful and really powerful. But so too can something as simple as this, Ansof's matrix, some of you may be familiar with. It's about thinking, which markets you're in and which products you're offering, and looking at, is it about, for example, as in the top left box there, do you continue selling your existing products or services to the market you're currently in? Maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's actually getting more value out of that. But actually, maybe it's about working with that same market and selling new products, or selling your existing product range into new markets, or maybe it's about developing both. So new markets and new products, really going out there, that blue sky thinking, if you like, so that you're in an area that is where your innovations are truly valued, but where you have minimal competition. So it's about making that innovation real for the business and thinking logically and laterally, not just based on gut feeling. Gut feel can be powerful, but it's also good to have the evidence to support it. It can be worth thinking about design thinking and some of those basic ideas. And without going too far into it, if you're not familiar with design thinking, definitely take a look at it. And particularly those elements of empathizing and getting to really understand the customers, but also lean innovation. So recognizing that you need to work through all of your assumptions, you need to engage with the customers, you need to trial your ideas, and you need to take a lean approach. And I would argue that the intelligent failure aspect that I mentioned earlier on fits in very neatly with this. So it's taking steps, taking measured steps to develop new ideas in new ways for new markets in a way that isn't going to undermine or cost you the business. Take risks, yes, but take intelligent risks. So that then brings us to this question. How do you innovate in a crisis? Where do you go from here? Well, I would suggest, I'm going to open the floor to any questions that people may wish to ask, that it's about taking a step back, looking at where your business is now, looking at where you want to go, being realistic. If business is down, that doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with what you're doing. But at the same time, it can be a great opportunity to look ahead and to see what other opportunities there might be and how you can reinvent your business and use this crisis that we're currently in as a way of taking new steps, extracting new value, and being ready for the upturn when it comes. So on that, I'm just going to pause for a moment and say, are there any questions? Does anyone have any particular thoughts or perspectives that they wish to share? I think, Paul, that's you tapping away there. Do you have any thoughts, or is that an accidental microphone? No. Okay. Anyone want to drop anything in the chat box if you're not able to put the microphone on? I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on some of the points I raised. Feel free to challenge me. I'm always open to being challenged. Got a quiet bunch today.
Hi, this is Paul.
Hey Paul, how are you?
Hi. I suppose I'm in the startup phase of a furniture design and making business, and I suppose I'm just trying to find out where the market is now. Is there a market? Just I suppose there's lots of questions coming up for me as to are people going to have the money to spend on bespoke furniture, or do I need to pivot some way in terms of obviously computer desks and stuff like that. But I'd be just interested to have your insights on maybe where is the market now, or is there a market, or constructive things that I can do, maybe not to launch into it straight away.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
No, I think it does, and tell me once I've finished talking if I've misunderstood. But I think on the one hand, it's about testing the market, obviously, and getting a sense of how it is, because you've probably heard, as we all have, that spending is down, and spending is down on the one hand because we can't spend. We can't go. Until yesterday, if I wanted a desk, I had to try and order it online. And my wife, for example, ordered a desk. And I know you're talking bespoke furniture, but bear with me. My wife ordered a desk 3 weeks ago. It's not due here for another 2 weeks. In the meantime, IKEA is now being allowed to open, as have other retailers. We just haven't been allowed to spend. So the money, people have money on a certain level. Of course, people who've been made unemployed, it's a slightly different situation, but it's different to 10 years ago. So what I would suggest is doing another batch of market research. I'm assuming you already have, perhaps developing some prototypes, but doing it using that, say, intelligent failure approach. Don't risk the entire business or all of your capital, but start to work out how you can develop prototypes and test them in the market, so that you have them ready and you're able to get feedback from people. Because the thing with furniture is most people, I suspect, can't actually really imagine it unless they've seen it. People go to showrooms so they can sit on a sofa or a chair or use a table and just see how it feels. So it's getting that sense. But then also looking outwards, the points I made about talking to people who you are collaborating with, talking to retailers, talking to people who may help you sell it, talking to your suppliers to see what they're seeing, just to gather as much intelligence as possible, and also looking more broadly. So if you're able to, for example, to see what bespoke furniture makers in the US, in the UK, in Germany, in Singapore, whatever markets you can kind of access, see what they're doing and see what interesting ideas they're developing as a way of testing their products and getting them out to the market. There's the sorts of very quick and dirty approaches that I would mention. I don't know if that makes sense or answer your question.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense. Yeah. yeah, and looking outside as well and seeing what's going on. Fantastic, Laurie. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thank you, Paul. Anyone else got any questions or comments? I can hear a few clicks there. Okay. So earlier on, I had my two Twitter handles. Feel free to take a look at those. Feel free to track me down on LinkedIn, should you wish. Equally, you are more than welcome to send me an email should you have any questions or have any particular thoughts. I'm always very happy, I should say, to respond, to have a chat. If there's anything that you feel I haven't fully explored, or you've just got any questions about anything that you want to sort of touch on, I'm always happy to have a chat and answer any questions or thoughts. But unless there are any other sort of thoughts or comments, that's it from me today. As I said, every crisis has an opportunity. Don't let the crisis go to waste is a bit of a cliched phrase at this point, but there is truth in it. Most of the time it's used in terms of cutting costs, but you can also use it as a way of driving innovation and thinking differently about where you've come from, where you are, and where you want to be. So hopefully this discussion today has given you some useful insights into some of those points. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Poddy, for your comment. Thank you, Claire. It's been great to speak to you all. Thank you to Republic of Work for the opportunity to speak to you all. And of course, check out the upcoming events on the What's On section of the Republic of Work website. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and good luck with your innovation.